Donna Presley was 74 years old when she finally sat down and admitted something she never thought she would say out loud, that keeping Elvis's secrets had become heavier with age, not easier. She had spent decades guarding stories, protecting memories, and preserving a version of Elvis that only a handful of people ever truly knew. And as she eased back into her chair, fingers folded over one another, she confessed that speaking now wasn't about sensationalism or rewriting history. It was about releasing the weight she'd carried since she was a girl. When the world looks at Elvis Presley, she said, they see the spectacle, the velvet, the swagger, the myth. But she saw the man who paced at night when guilt kept him awake, the man whose shoulders slumped when the world wanted more than he could give, the man who quietly tried to repair the kinds of wounds nobody applauded. She saw a generosity so instinctive, so deeply wired into him, that sometimes it frightened the people who loved him. And now, at 74, she felt time nudging her to finally speak for him. She began with the earliest memories, not because they were grand or dramatic, but because they revealed who Elvis always was beneath the fame that later consumed him. Donna remembered a boy who gave away his lunch money before he ever thought about becoming a star. A boy whose mama worried he'd never keep a dollar in his pocket long enough to help himself. A boy who would look around at people struggling and feel responsible for them, even when he barely had anything of his own. Donna said that this instinct didn't disappear once he became famous. It grew deeper, more complicated, more emotional. She believed Elvis was terrified of losing touch with his roots in Tupelo, with the version of himself that once stood in a shotgun house praying for another chance at a warm meal. His generosity wasn't a public relations move or a carefully curated persona. It was the one piece of childhood he refused to surrender, no matter how much the world asked him to become someone else. As she described him, there was a softness in her voice, not the kind that glosses over truth, but the kind that comes from remembering someone in their totality. She knew the world adored the polished version of Elvis, the man who stepped onto the stage lit like a miracle. But she had lived inside the quieter moments, the ones that unfolded when the crowds were gone and the lights were off. Those were the moments that shaped her memory of him. She could still picture him walking through Graceland with that restless energy he got whenever he sensed someone nearby was hurting. He would pause, listen, absorb the problem, and then find a way, sometimes reckless, sometimes extraordinary, to fix it. Donna explained that Elvis didn't give because he wanted gratitude. In fact, he often didn't want the person to know the help came from him. He gave because it anchored him. It reminded him of the kid he used to be, the one who promised himself that if he ever escaped poverty, he would pull as many people with him as he could. Donna admitted that this kind of generosity created tension inside the family, especially as Elvis's fame grew and his financial responsibilities multiplied. She recalled her mother worrying that Elvis was too trusting, too open-handed, too willing to sacrifice his own well-being for someone else's comfort. Elvis would listen, nod, and then do exactly what he intended all along. Donna eventually realized that trying to redirect his heart was pointless. Kindness was as essential to him as breathing. But she also understood that generosity, especially when carried by someone with an empire on his shoulders, wasn't simple. It forced Elvis into impossible positions. Giving to one person meant disappointing another. Offering help privately sometimes erupted into rumors publicly, and trying to remain emotionally available to strangers left him drained in ways his audience never saw. She watched this contradiction unfold quietly over the years, as Elvis struggled with the balance between wanting to help everyone and realizing he was still just one man. She leaned forward as she spoke, her eyes shifting as though she were peering back into rooms long gone. Donna described being in the house when Graceland became a revolving door of people, friends, distant acquaintances, struggling musicians, families with nowhere to go, and Elvis welcomed them all. He didn't ask for qualifications or stories or references. If he sensed someone was in need, he opened the door wider. Donna could feel the ripple of those choices. Sometimes the generosity brought joy. Sometimes it brought chaos, but Elvis seemed to believe that having more than others came with a responsibility to share it. Donna understood that he carried an inexplicable guilt for being chosen by fate. Success felt random to him, almost unfair, and his giving became a way to make that imbalance feel less cruel. The deeper she went into the memories, the more she revealed the emotional conflict that Elvis rarely articulated. She said that fame changed the landscape around him but never changed his core. The problem was that his core, the compassionate, trusting, impulsively generous young man, now wielded money, influence, and access that magnified every decision. She remembered the arguments behind closed doors when Elvis wanted to step in and help someone who had no connection to the family. She remembered the tension with managers who insisted that his giving had to be controlled, monitored, budgeted, approved. She remembered the nights when Elvis sat alone in his room, torn between obeying the people protecting his career and listening to the young boy inside him who knew exactly what it felt like to be overlooked. Donna grew quiet as she explained that Elvis's most profound acts of generosity took place in moments when he felt the most spiritually disconnected. During the years when success felt hollow, when fame felt suffocating, when he questioned whether he still mattered, Elvis clung to the one thing that always made him feel grounded: helping someone who desperately needed it. She described evenings when he paced the floor, wrestling with an inner turbulence he rarely discussed. And in those hours, his generosity often took its most dramatic form. Donna believed those choices were never random. She thought Elvis gave at his highest capacity precisely when he felt the most fragile. It was his way of reminding himself that he could still be a force for good when everything else felt uncertain. She shifted the conversation to a specific period when Graceland was more than a home. It became a refuge for anyone caught in the storm of their own life. Donna remembered watching Elvis move through the house with a kind of intuitive awareness, sensing when someone was afraid to ask for help. He would lean in, ask questions, and then disappear for a few minutes, returning with a solution no one expected. A paid bill, a job offer, a new car, tuition for a child he barely knew, medical expenses quietly handled behind the scenes. Donna insisted that these stories, the ones few people ever learned about, were the clearest window into Elvis's soul. He didn't orchestrate them for headlines or applause. These were acts of kindness performed in shadows, never meant for the spotlight that defined him. What struck her most, she said, was that Elvis kept these moments off the record deliberately. He asked people not to talk about them. He refused to let publicists spin them into narratives. Donna believed that part of Elvis's struggle was that he lived inside a world built to turn every personal choice into a commodity. So his true generosity could only survive in silence. That silence became a sanctuary for him, and eventually, a burden for her. She held these stories for decades, knowing they shaped the man more than his glittering reputation ever could. Donna took a breath as she approached the memory she had always avoided sharing, the night she witnessed an act of generosity so unexpected, so personal, that she never spoke about it outside her closest circle. She described the quiet inside Graceland that evening, the way Elvis seemed unsettled, as though he could feel someone's need reaching for him through the walls. A visitor had arrived unexpectedly, carrying news Elvis wasn't prepared for. Donna didn't reveal the details yet. She simply hinted at the tension that rose in the room, the way Elvis's posture changed, the way he insisted on handling the situation himself even when his team urged him not to. Donna felt the room shift into something almost electric, as though Elvis's empathy had latched onto a part of his past he never fully healed. In that moment, Donna realized something profound about Elvis. His generosity wasn't just an emotional impulse. It was a responsibility he felt in his bones. A responsibility he had never asked for but could never set down. She said this moment changed her understanding of him forever. It revealed a truth about Elvis that no biography, no documentary, no rumor-laden interview had ever captured. A truth she had promised herself she would carry until she was ready to speak. As she reached the edge of the story, she paused. Her voice steadied, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. She said that what Elvis did next was not only remarkable, it was the moment she understood the full weight of his heart. And it was the moment she realized that the world never knew Elvis Presley the way his family did. She opened her mouth to finally reveal what happened that night, and then she stopped, as if gathering the courage to continue. Because the story she was about to share wasn't just about Elvis's generosity. It was about the emotional cost he paid every time he reached beyond himself for someone else. Donna eased into the next part of her story with a kind of solemn calm, as though she were stepping back into a night that never fully left her. She said that some memories settle quietly into the past, while others remain suspended, still vibrating with the same tension they carried decades earlier. This one belonged to the second category, a night at Graceland when Elvis's generosity was tested in a way that exposed both his compassion and the complicated machinery surrounding him. It was late, the house quiet except for the soft hum of distant conversation, when a visitor arrived with news that altered the entire atmosphere. Donna didn't reveal the identity right away. She focused instead on the feeling, the way the air seemed to tighten, the way even the walls appeared to recognize something was shifting. Earlier that evening, Graceland had been warm and relaxed. Elvis had been in good spirits, drifting between rooms, sharing jokes and humming melodies to himself the way he did when he felt creatively restless. Donna remembered watching him from the staircase, observing the lightness in his movements, a rare softness for a man who carried the weight of an empire on his back. She recalled thinking that, for once, Elvis seemed almost at ease, but calm never lasted long in his world. That night, tranquility was broken by a quiet knock at the front door, one that carried hesitation rather than confidence, as though the person on the other side wasn't sure whether they were deserving of stepping inside. Donna said she felt the change before she understood it. Elvis always sensed need, almost instinctively, and he turned toward the door with a focus that startled her. When the visitor was brought in, Elvis's expression shifted, not with anger or suspicion, but with a recognition she couldn't yet place. The man looked worn down, carrying the kind of defeated exhaustion that spoke louder than any introduction. He wasn't asking for autographs or favors or backstage passes. He wasn't seeking proximity to fame. He stood there because he had nowhere else to go, and Elvis saw that immediately. The visitor explained his situation in fragments, a job lost, medical bills piling up, a family slipping into crisis. Even before the story was fully told, Donna noticed the change in Elvis. There was a tightening around his eyes, a stillness in his posture. He looked not like a celebrity, but like someone who had once known desperation intimately. Donna felt something in the room break open. Elvis wasn't hearing about a stranger's misfortune. He was hearing an echo of his own childhood, when life was held together with duct tape and prayer, and when every unexpected bill threatened to unravel what little security the Presleys had. She remembered the staff exchanging uneasy glances. Visitors came to Graceland all the time with stories, some true, some exaggerated, and Elvis had already been warned repeatedly that people would take advantage of him if he didn't learn to create boundaries. But boundaries evaporated the moment Elvis recognized someone's suffering. Donna believed he didn't just hear stories like this, he felt them, and that made it impossible for him to disengage. What was unfolding in front of them was more than a plea for help. It was a moment that tugged at the deepest parts of Elvis's identity. Before anyone could intervene, Elvis stepped forward, asking questions gently, carefully, in a voice that almost seemed to lower itself so the man wouldn't feel ashamed. Donna said that this was something people rarely understood about him. He had the ability to make someone feel seen without making them feel small. It was an instinct he carried long before fame shaped him. And in this moment, that instinct took over entirely. His team tried to interject with reminders about procedures, liabilities, and the risks of getting involved too directly. Elvis didn't even turn toward them. Donna saw a stubbornness etched across his face that she had learned to recognize over the years. When Elvis felt morally compelled, No amount of business logic could sway him. His kindness was not negotiable. His compassion had no budget line. And if someone tried to stand between him and the person he believed needed him, Elvis's gentle nature could turn fierce in a heartbeat. Donna said the argument began quietly, with one of the men reminding Elvis that they couldn't keep responding personally to every crisis. But Elvis wasn't responding to every crisis. He was responding to this one, and to him, that distinction mattered. The visitor sat silently in the corner, clearly overwhelmed by the tension his presence had created, but unsure how to escape it. Elvis noticed his discomfort and snapped, not at the visitor, but at the people around him who insisted on treating generosity like a liability. The room grew increasingly tense. Donna felt it as a physical pressure against her chest. Elvis's voice, normally calm and steady, carried a sharper edge. He was not arguing simply about money. He was fighting for the right to remain the person he believed he should be. A man who once had nothing. A man who understood how quickly life could collapse. A man who refused to look away when someone else was drowning. Donna realized that Elvis wasn't trying to save this visitor because he saw himself as a hero. He was trying to save him because he knew what it felt like to wish for one. As the discussion escalated, Elvis grew more emotional. He reminded his team, though perhaps he was reminding himself, that success meant nothing if he couldn't use it to lift someone else. He spoke about the promises he made silently as a young boy, promises that no matter how far he rose, he would never forget the people who were left behind. Donna watched him take a breath, steadying himself as though bracing for a decision he already knew he would make. She sensed that once Elvis crossed this line, there was no undoing it. And then he did exactly what she feared and admired in equal measure. He intervened directly. Elvis walked toward the visitor, knelt beside him so they were eye to eye, and asked what it would take to fix the situation, not in a performative way, but with genuine intent to follow through. Donna said the visitor broke down, overwhelmed by the idea that someone like Elvis Presley would kneel beside him as though they were equals. That was the moment she realized Elvis wasn't helping this man out of pity. He was helping him out of recognition. Elvis saw the struggle not as a burden, but as a reflection of the fragility every human carries. Donna described the tension in the room as something almost alive. His team argued harder now, reminding him of past situations where kindness had been exploited. They recited numbers, obligations, contractual commitments, logistical risks. All the while, Elvis remained unmoved. He listened, but his decision had already hardened within him. Donna said she had never seen him more resolute. It wasn't anger or rebellion, it was clarity. He believed that helping this man was the right thing to do, and he would bear the consequences, whatever they were. For a brief moment, Donna felt a pang of fear. She knew how much pressure Elvis was already under: the expectations, the financial obligations, the emotional weight of fame. She also knew that he often gave so much of himself that there was little left for his own well-being. But she also understood that trying to stop him would be like trying to stop a current once it found its direction. Elvis's heart was already moving, and there was no argument strong enough to catch it. When the visitor tried to stand and leave, insisting he couldn't accept anything from Elvis, Elvis gently placed a hand on his shoulder and told him that accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness. Donna remembered that moment vividly because Elvis said it with a tremor in his voice, as though he were speaking to his younger self, the version of him that had struggled, prayed, and hoped someone might do the same for his family when they were trapped in poverty. The visitor finally relented, not because he wanted charity, but because Elvis offered dignity along with it. Donna felt the room soften. The arguing subsided. Even Elvis's team recognized that this moment wasn't about money. It was about something much more intimate, a man trying to reconcile the boy he once was with the icon he had become. Elvis arranged everything quietly, refusing to let the details become public or even discussed outside that room. He provided what the family needed: housing, medical assistance, stability, and ensured they would never again reach a place so desperate. Donna said the gratitude in the visitor's eyes wasn't directed at Elvis the superstar, but at Elvis, the human being who saw him without judgment. After the man left, the house felt heavier, as if the weight of the situation settled into its walls. Elvis stood alone in the center of the room, his shoulders slightly hunched, the adrenaline fatting. Donna approached him, unsure whether to comfort him or simply share the silence. He didn't look proud or triumphant. He looked contemplative, haunted almost. Donna realized in that moment that helping others didn't always bring Elvis the relief people assumed. Sometimes it brought memories he didn't want to revisit. Sometimes it reopened wounds he carried quietly. He finally turned to her and said something she never forgot. "If you've been blessed, you don't get to ignore suffering, not when you know what it feels like." Donna understood then why this night mattered so deeply. Elvis didn't give because he had money. He gave because he remembered a world where he didn't. And every time he helped someone like that visitor, he wasn't just offering financial support. He was repairing something fragile within himself. She leaned back as she finished recalling the memory, her expression soft but resolute. The world had never heard this story, she said, because Elvis insisted that acts of kindness should remain private. But she believed it was time people understood how much of himself Elvis poured into these hidden moments. They shaped him far more than the public ever knew. And then Donna hinted with a quiet gravity that this night was only the beginning. There were other stories, deeper, more painful, more revealing, that exposed the truth about Elvis's heart and the cost he paid for holding it open. Donna took a long breath before continuing, as though the memories she was about to revisit required steady footing. Section 2 had revealed a moment when Elvis's generosity disrupted his own household, but what she shared next reached deeper, into a part of Elvis's life even his closest relatives rarely saw. This was where the public image of Elvis Presley dissolved completely, replaced by the private man whose compassion ran so deep it often frightened the people who loved him. Donna explained that some of the most astonishing acts of kindness Elvis ever performed never made it into newspapers, never became stories retold by fans, and never even circulated through the inner Presley circle. These were the gifts he hid not from the world, but from the weight of expectation that fame had sewn into his every move. He protected them because they represented the purest pieces of himself, pieces untouched by publicity, pressure, or the machinery that constantly surrounded him. She said that one of Elvis's greatest fears was that his generosity would be interpreted as a performance. He hated the idea that kindness would be mistaken for a stunt. So he practiced a kind of secret charity, a private system of helping others that operated entirely outside the view of his entourage. Donna didn't learn about many of these moments until years later, long after the recipients themselves felt safe enough to share. Even then, the stories seemed unbelievable. They sounded too poetic, too cinematic, too perfectly aligned with the myth of Elvis that the world adored. But these were not myths. They were intimate truths, living quietly between the lines of his life. Donna leaned back slightly, as if repositioning herself to face a truth she had long kept sheltered. She explained that Elvis had a habit of slipping out of Graceland late at night with only one or two trusted cousins or guards. Sometimes these drives were simply a way to clear his mind, but other times they had purpose that Elvis never announced, even to those sitting in the car beside him. Donna remembered one particular night when she was young, riding along while Elvis stared silently out the window, his expression heavy, as though he was thinking about someone miles away. She assumed he was upset about work or feeling overwhelmed by the spotlight. Only later did she learn that he was on his way to deliver help to a family who had written a letter describing their struggle. A letter Elvis never showed to anyone else because he worried people would question why he felt so responsible. This wasn't an isolated event. Over and over, Donna discovered stories that unfolded behind the curtain of Graceland's routines. A single mother who woke to find her entire medical debt erased. A disabled veteran whose home was quietly renovated. a musician who received a new instrument anonymously, only realizing months later who had sent it. Elvis orchestrated these acts with careful secrecy, ensuring that no grateful phone calls reached him, no thank you letters piled up, no public acknowledgments threatened to swallow the gesture. He believed that the purity of the act depended on it remaining untainted. Donna paused as she reflected on the emotional complexity of this practice. To the people Elvis helped, these moments felt miraculous. But to Elvis, they weren't heroic, they were necessary. She explained that Elvis lived with a strange sense of emotional debt, as if surviving his own struggles obligated him to lift others whenever possible. It wasn't guilt exactly, nor was it pride. It was something in between, something rooted in the memory of sleeping in cold rooms and wondering whether the world had forgotten the Presleys entirely. Helping others was not about easing their burden alone. It was about easing a burden he had carried for decades, the burden of having survived poverty while so many people he knew had not. She then turned to a story that had lived in her heart for more than 50 years, a story few had ever heard in full. It began during a particularly difficult stretch in Elvis's life when fame was pressuring him from all sides. He was exhausted, emotionally raw, and privately battling feelings he rarely expressed out loud. It was during this period that Elvis received a letter from a young girl whose father had recently died. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't even asking for a reply. She simply wrote because Elvis had been her father's favorite artist, and listening to his records helped her feel close to him again. The letter ended with a single sentence that Donna said Elvis read over and over. "My daddy always said you sang like you knew what it feels like to lose something." That line moved him in a way Donna couldn't fully describe. Elvis hadn't lost a parent in childhood, but he understood the feeling of losing everything you thought you could count on. He understood hunger, instability, shame, fear, all the shadows that had shaped the boy he used to be. He sat with the letter for hours, hardly speaking, as though the words had found a part of him he rarely acknowledged. And then, without explaining why, Elvis decided he needed to help the girl and her family. Not with a showy gesture, not with merchandise or signed photos, but with something tangible that could alter their day-to-day life. Donna recalled Elvis quietly making phone calls, arranging for the family to receive monthly support through a foundation he had worked with for years, but insisting his name never be attached. He also sent the girl a new record player and every gospel album he had ever recorded, though the package included no signature, no note, no hint that the gift had come from him. Donna asked him why he didn't at least sign his name, and Elvis looked at her with an expression she never forgot. "If she thinks it came from her daddy's favorite singer," he said softly, "that's enough. The music will mean more than my name ever could." Donna explained that this pattern, this instinctive, almost hidden way of helping, became more pronounced as Elvis got older. The more fame pressed in, the more he retreated into private acts of generosity. She believed that part of him wanted to hold onto the one area of his life that hadn't been touched by contracts, advisors, or expectations. Helping others was the last piece of Elvis that still belonged only to him. But not all of these hidden acts were simple. Some carried emotional consequences that lingered for years. Donna recalled an instance involving a former employee who had fallen on hard times. Elvis found out through a convoluted chain of conversations and insisted on intervening quietly. But his involvement created tension inside the household, stirring up old conflicts among staff members who questioned Elvis's loyalty or motives. Elvis absorbed the conflict without complaint, but Donna could see the toll it took on him. Every act of kindness, no matter how pure, seemed to come with a cost he had learned to accept. It was as though Elvis believed compassion required sacrifice, and he was willing to pay the emotional toll each time. Donna shared another memory from a Christmas Eve that still brought tears to her eyes. Elvis had discovered that one of the local families near Graceland was facing eviction. Without telling a soul, he arranged for the family to receive a new home, fully furnished, groceries stocked, utilities paid for a year. He worked on it for weeks, coordinating everything between shows and rehearsals. Then, on Christmas morning, he drove by anonymously just to see the lights on inside the house. Donna, who rode with him, remembered the quiet smile on his face as he watched the family through the window, laughing and unwrapping gifts. Elvis didn't get out of the car. He didn't want his presence to alter their joy. He simply watched for a few minutes, nodded to himself, and drove away. Donna believed that moment meant more to him than any ovation he ever received on stage. She then revealed something that surprised even her as she spoke, that Elvis often hid his generosity from his family not because he didn't trust them, but because he didn't want them to worry. He knew Donna's mother feared he would give too much, stretch himself thin, or attract people who might take advantage of him. He knew that sharing every detail would lead to conflict or concern. So he made a choice to protect his family from the emotional strain of his giving by keeping the most significant acts to himself. Donna admitted that learning these stories years later made her realize how much Elvis carried alone. But the most striking truth of all came toward the end of this section of her story. Donna said that Elvis's hidden gifts weren't just financial or material. Sometimes his greatest act of generosity was giving people time, attention, or understanding. She remembered nights when he sat with people who felt broken, listening for hours without once checking the time or drifting away into his own thoughts. He didn't just give money. He gave presence, which was perhaps the rarest thing he had to offer. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, Elvis made it his mission to offer something back, even when he had little left to give himself. As Donna neared the end of Section 3, she leaned forward with quiet intensity. She said that the world had always tried to define Elvis by the scale of his fame, but the people he helped privately defined him by the depth of his compassion. Those stories, the ones he hid deliberately, revealed the side of Elvis that fame could never overshadow. And yet, she added, there was one story she had never shared until now, because it exposed not only Elvis's generosity, but also the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. She took a breath, steadying herself. The next story, she said, changed everything she thought she understood about Elvis Presley, not just the man he was, but the man he feared becoming. Donna hesitated before stepping into the final story, the one she had guarded the closest, not because it was scandalous or controversial, but because it revealed a part of Elvis she wasn't sure people would understand. She said some truths feel delicate, even decades later, too human, too raw, too different from the image the world built around a man whose life had long been shaped by expectations he never asked for. This last story, she explained, was not about a gift Elvis gave, but about the emotional cost of giving, the quiet ache that generosity carved into him over time. And it began during a period when Elvis seemed suspended between the weight of his success and the longing for the simple life he could never return to. Donna said the memory was anchored in a night she wished she could forget, not because it was painful in the dramatic sense, but because it revealed a level of vulnerability Elvis rarely allowed anyone to witness. Graceland had been unusually quiet that evening. The usual laughter, music, and late-night chatter had faded into silence, leaving the house heavy with a tension she couldn't immediately place. Donna had been walking down the hall when she noticed Elvis sitting alone in the den, his elbows propped on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor as though he were studying something only he could see. At first she assumed he was exhausted from a long stretch of performances. He was always pushing himself harder than he needed to, but as she stepped closer, she realized the expression on his face wasn't fatigue. It was something deeper, more unsettled. She approached carefully, asking whether he needed anything, but Elvis didn't look up. Instead, he released a long exhale, the kind that seemed to draw years out of him rather than air. Donna sat beside him, not wanting to intrude, but unable to walk away when she sensed something breaking inside him. When Elvis finally spoke, his voice carried a tremor she had heard only a few times in her life. He said he felt like he was living two lives, the one the world demanded of him, and the one he wished he could live quietly, anonymously, without the constant responsibility of being Elvis Presley. Donna listened, unsure whether to respond, because she knew this wasn't a conversation about fame. This was about identity, about the loss of normalcy, about the emotional fractures that come from living inside a legacy that never sleeps. He told her he worried that no matter how much he gave, it would never be enough to silence the guilt he carried from his childhood. He said he sometimes felt overwhelmed by the pressure to be generous, not because anyone forced him to be, but because he remembered what it felt like to have nothing. And then he admitted something that shook Donna deeply, that every time he helped someone, he hoped it would ease the sense of unworthiness he had carried since he was young. Helping others made him feel useful, grounded, human, but the feeling never lasted as long as he wished it would. Donna said she had never heard him speak this openly about the emotional side of his giving. Elvis was known as a man with a big heart, someone who loved deeply and gave freely, but the vulnerability behind that generosity was often invisible. People assumed kindness came naturally to him, that it was effortless. What they didn't see was how much weight he carried in the space between giving and receiving gratitude, a space filled with doubts he rarely spoke aloud. As he talked that night, Elvis confided in her that he feared people only saw him as a provider, not as a person. He explained that sometimes he felt surrounded by requests, expectations, and needs he didn't know how to fulfill without losing pieces of himself. He wasn't angry about it. He understood that generosity came with responsibility, but he struggled with the loneliness that grew in the shadows of that responsibility. Donna felt tears forming because she realized Elvis wasn't asking for sympathy. He was confessing a truth he had held inside for far too long. He told her that the hardest part wasn't the giving or even the pressure. The hardest part was that he didn't know how to stop. If he turned someone away, he felt like he was abandoning a version of himself he had promised never to forget. But if he kept giving endlessly, he feared he was slowly emptying himself of the strength he needed for his own life. Donna felt torn between admiration and heartbreak as she listened. Elvis's generosity was beautiful, but it came with a cost he paid quietly, privately, and without any expectation that someone would repay him emotionally. As the night went on, Elvis shifted the conversation to a story Donna had never expected to hear. He told her about a man who had once approached him for help, not financially, but emotionally. The man was a former acquaintance from years earlier, someone Elvis barely knew but had crossed paths with during his early days in Memphis. They weren't close, but the man recognized Elvis and reached out during a moment of despair. He told Elvis that seeing his success had inspired him, but also made him feel ashamed of how far he had fallen behind. He confessed that he had thought about ending his life. Elvis had listened to him for hours, offering comfort and sharing pieces of his own struggles in a way that felt shockingly vulnerable. Donna had never known Elvis to share personal pain with strangers, but he did that night. He told the man about the pressures he faced, the loneliness, the nights when he questioned whether he was strong enough to withstand the expectations placed on him. He didn't reveal these things to build connection. He revealed them because he wanted the man to feel less alone. Elvis believed that vulnerability was a gift too, one far more valuable than money. The man survived that dark period, in part because Elvis stepped into his life at the exact moment he needed someone to listen. But Elvis never told a soul about it. To him, saving a life wasn't something to boast about, it was something sacred. Donna found out only because Elvis carried the weight of that moment with him for years. He worried whether he had done enough, whether there were others he had unknowingly failed to reach. Donna said this story revealed the heart of Elvis's greatest fear, that despite all the love and generosity he poured into the world, he would never be able to save everyone who needed saving. It wasn't a rational fear, but it was deeply human, and it haunted him. She explained that this fear drove him to give even more, to stretch himself emotionally in ways his inner circle struggled to understand. They saw generosity as an act of kindness, Elvis experienced it as a responsibility tied to his very identity. In his mind, if he had the power to ease someone's suffering, then failing to do so felt like a betrayal of everything he had survived. Donna paused for a long moment after revealing this, her gaze lowering as though she were standing once again in that quiet den, watching Elvis struggle with the invisible weight he carried. She said it took her years to understand why he had trusted her with those admissions. He wasn't looking for advice. He wasn't seeking reassurance. He simply needed someone to see him, not as an icon, not as a savior, not as a performer, but as a man wrestling with the emotional cost of his own compassion. What she said next was the part she feared people might misunderstand. Elvis's generosity was enormous, yes, but it wasn't endless. Every act of giving carved something out of him. Every emotional burden he absorbed lingered. And while the world saw a man overflowing with love and abundance, Donna saw the quiet toll it took on him, especially in the final years when fame had grown heavier than ever. She explained that the deepest truth she carried was this: Elvis didn't just give because he wanted to help others. He gave because he hoped that by doing so, he could quiet the parts of himself that still felt unworthy, unseen, or afraid. Generosity was his way of holding the world together and holding himself together at the same time. As Donna finished recounting the story, she admitted that this truth was why she had kept the memory hidden for so long. She didn't want the world to see Elvis's vulnerability as weakness. She didn't want people to mistake his emotional struggles for instability. Instead, she wanted his story to illuminate the complexity of compassion, how giving can be both a blessing and a burden, a source of strength and a source of sorrow. In the end, she said, Elvis Presley was not a flawless saint or a fragile soul. He was a man with a heart so open that the world sometimes overwhelmed him. A man who carried his past like a shadow behind him, always present, always shaping the choices he made. A man whose generosity was both his greatest gift and his deepest wound. Donna leaned forward, her voice soft but steady. She said she hoped the world would finally understand that the legacy Elvis left behind wasn't just in his music, his performances, or his fame. It was in the lives he touched quietly, anonymously, without expecting anything in return. It was in the people who survived because he listened, in the families who thrived because he intervened, in the strangers who carried hope because he offered kindness in moments when they believed the world had forgotten them. The truth Donna feared the world wasn't ready for, she said, was not a scandal or a revelation that would tarnish Elvis's image. The truth was simply this: Elvis Presley was more generous than the world ever knew, and that generosity cost him more than anyone could imagine. As she finished, her eyes glistened not with sadness but with reverence. For the first time in her life, she felt she had honored the man behind the legend. And she hoped that by sharing these stories, people would remember Elvis not only for the music that changed history, but for the heart that changed lives. Elvis's greatest legacy wasn't built on stages or records. It lived in the quiet acts of kindness he kept hidden from the world. If Donna's story moved you, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more untold truths that reveal the real people behind the legends we thought we knew.